Welcome to Reformed Thinking, a segment of The Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources and, well, we try to uncover the crucial insights within them.
That's the goal.
And today we're doing a deep dive into something Scripture calls a primordial vice, pride. We live in a time, that often seems to champion self-confidence, even self-promotion. But ancient wisdom, especially the Bible, it paints a really different picture.
It does. It raises the question, doesn't it? Why does Scripture caution so strongly against something our culture often holds up as, well, almost a virtue?
Right. So our deep dive today is going to try and uncover pride, not just as some minor surface flaw, but maybe as a core condition that shapes a lot of human experience.
Yeah, looking deeper.
We want to trace its presence through the biblical story, kind of dissect its theological makeup, learn from historical figures who really wrestled with it, and maybe most helpfully, discover the liberating remedies God provides.
Yeah.
So by the end, hopefully you'll gain a richer understanding of why this whole subject matters for your perspective, for your whole life, really. Let's unpack this.
What's really striking here, I think, is how consistently pride has been understood across centuries of theological thought. It's not a new problem.
Not at all.
And it truly takes a kind of spirit-guided perception, you could say, to recognize its subtle ways and its deep patterns in our own lives.
Absolutely. So we're starting our exploration by trying to understand and identify just how widespread pride's scope is. And the sources make it pretty clear pride is way more than just a small error or a slight character flaw.
Right, it's presented differently.
It's consistently shown as the root condition of fallen humanity, the spring from which all sorts of misplaced worship flow. It's like a fundamental bending of the heart away from the Creator.
A core orientation issue.
Yeah, and our sources highlight some very specific language used to describe this, both in the Old and New Testaments.
That's right. In the Old Testament, you've got a couple of Hebrew terms that really shed light on this. First, there's geisa. Yeah, it literally means to rise or to exalt. And this term, it captures that upward push of pride, that desire to lift oneself up, to be seen, to be honored. You can almost feel the striving in the word itself.
So it's that impulse to be on top, maybe? To be seen as better, perhaps even feeling like you deserve a higher standing.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it. But then there's another word, zadon.
Zadon.
And this one points to something maybe even more defiant. It means something like insolent presumption, a bold, almost audacious stance against divine rule.
Wow, so it's not just wanting to be high, but acting like you have a right to be there.
Yeah.
Kind of daring God.
Exactly. It carries a sense of contempt for boundaries, for God's authority. So these terms, they're not just about feeling good about yourself. They picture a creature actively trying to lift itself above its proper place.
That's a key distinction.
Then when you shift to the New Testament Greek, you find words like hyperophania and alazonia.
Yeah.
And these words, they vividly paint a picture of a swollen soul. Someone totally confident in their own sufficiency. It can mean empty boastfulness or just sheer puffed up arrogance. You can almost sense the self-important air in those descriptions. So this careful language tells us pride isn't just a casual idea in Scripture. It's specific.
And it seems to go even deeper than just a twisted desire, doesn't it? The sources talk about pride as an ontological revolt. What does that actually mean for how we should understand it?
Yeah, ontological revolt. That suggests it's a rebellion against the very structure of reality, against the order of existence itself.
Against being itself.
In a way, yes. Pride is a created being trying to climb up by cutting off its moral dependence on the Creator. It's a direct challenge to the Creator's inherent majesty. It's not just breaking a rule, it's trying to redefine who's God and who isn't.
That's huge.
Think about it. A created being trying to undo the very fabric of existence by putting itself above its Creator. This means that what we sometimes praise as, say, self-reliance or assertiveness could, at its core, be a faint echo of that first fundamental rebellion against God.
Wow.
It's much more insidious than just a character flaw. It's a basic reorientation of our whole being.
And historical figures, theologians like Augustine, they saw this clearly.
Oh, absolutely. Augustine spoke of amor sui.
Amor sui, love of self.
Right, but a disordered love, a love that bends the soul inward, away from God. For Augustine, the proud heart wants to be its own source, its own sufficiency, its own sustainer, even though its very existence hangs on God's moment-by-moment grace.
So it's not just being self-centered, but a kind of self-sufficiency that tries to ignore God's foundational role. Trying to replace God with the self.
Precisely stated. And Gregory the Great, coming about a century after Augustine, he built on this. He famously called pride the queen of the vices.
The queen.
Yeah, he saw it as the source, the mother, you could say, of all other wrongdoings, meaning that other sins, the ones we see more easily, often grow out of this central problem of pride.
Okay.
So this historical agreement really frames pride as fundamentally theological, a direct hit against divine sovereignty, and also as something generative, something that spawns a whole lot of other moral failures.
That leads us right into the consistent narrative of pride throughout the biblical story. It's not just an isolated issue, but like a central thread running through the whole Bible. Starting, of course, right at the beginning in Genesis.
Indeed. The first really clear public display of pride shows up in the serpent's deceptive promise to Adam and Eve. You will be like God. That's Genesis 3.5.
There it is.
That's that impulse of God, isn't it? The desire to rise, to push beyond creaturely limits. It's more than just simple disobedience. It's that deep ontological revolt we talked about, trying to grasp what belongs only to the Creator.
And the story immediately after Eden just keeps showing this pattern, right?
It really does. You see Cain's consuming resentment turning into murder. You see the violence and rebellion of the people before the flood. And then famously, the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. Each story shows humanity trying again and again to reach upward, to claim a glory and an independence that's reserved just for God.
And God's reaction to Babel is particularly telling, isn't it? The text says God comes down to scatter the builders.
Yes, that's a really crucial detail. It powerfully shows that God's descent, not human ascent, is the true pattern of salvation history. It sets this pattern for how God relates to proud humanity, always through condescension, through humbling himself, through grace.
So God coming down is the path to true elevation, not us trying to climb up.
Exactly, a total contrast to human striving.
The Old Testament consistently hammers this theme home, God's opposition to pride. Proverbs, for instance, is very direct about it.
Yeah, Proverbs really boils down pride's moral status. It says, everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. That's Proverbs 16.5. And there's that Hebrew word zadon again.
Insolent presumption.
Right. Signifying a defiant stance toward God's rule. It's a heart that's not just puffed up, but actively rebellious against God's rightful place. It's not just an inflated ego, it's a posture of rebellion.
And the prophets pick up this theme too.
Oh, definitely. Prophetic literature often dramatizes the consequences. Isaiah announces a coming day of the Lord, specifically directed against all that is lifted up. Isaiah 2.12. It's a clear warning that God himself will bring down every form of human self-exaltation.
And we see concrete examples of this, like Nebuchadnezzar. That's a pretty stark story.
A very clear and memorable one from Daniel chapter 4. After Nebuchadnezzar boasts about his own power, his own accomplishments, the great kingdom he built by his might.
Right. Is not this great Babylon which I have built.
Exactly that. And immediately he's supernaturally humbled, forced to live like a wild animal until he finally admits God's ultimate sovereignty. It's a graphic, visible lesson in humility.
You can't miss the point there.
No. And similarly, the prophet Obadiah describes Edom's pride, their false sense of security in their mountain fortress, showing God's consistent opposition to these hyper-elevated hearts.
And this theme continues even between the testaments.
Yes, even in the intertestamental writings, books like Sirach, texts found at Qumran, you find this continued condemnation of pride, of haughty eyes. It consistently prepares the ground for the New Testament's clear statement that God opposes the proud.
Okay, so moving into the Gospels, Jesus' teachings seem to bring this issue home in a very practical, very personal way. That parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector feels like a perfect example. It shows how pride can even poison religious acts.
Luke 18, yes. It brilliantly exposes spiritual self-exaltation. The Pharisee's prayer is shown as just an open index of self-trust. He's emphasizing his own comparative righteousness.
He lists his good deeds.
Right. He proudly lists what he does, fasting, tithing, and explicitly thanks God he's not like other people, especially not like that humble tax collector standing nearby. His prayer reveals a heart that judges others while lifting itself up.
And the contrast is the tax collector,
who just stands far off, won't even look up to heaven, beats his breast and says, God be merciful to me, a sinner. It's a simple, humble cry for mercy. The parable powerfully shows that even external religious acts, things that look righteous, can be fueled by deep pride.
It's a sharp picture. And it's striking that even Jesus' closest followers, the disciples, struggled with this. It shows how pervasive it is.
Yes, their ongoing arguments about who was the greatest, recorded in Mark 10, for instance, they reveal plainly how pride can stick around even among committed followers.
They're arguing about who gets the best seats in the kingdom.
Exactly. Who sits at Jesus' right and left hand? It clearly shows that until the cross really recalibrates their aspirations, shifts their whole understanding of what true greatness is, pride can still be a major force.
And then you have Christ's own example, which stands in such powerful opposition to all pride. It sets the ultimate pattern for humility.
John's gospel gives us that incredible foot-washing scene in John 13. Christ, the Lord of all, willingly does the job of a household slave.
Washing their dirty feet.
Yes, it's a deliberate, dramatic reversal of every earthly hierarchy, every expectation of status and power. It shows pride as utterly opposed to the Messiah's very nature. He, as Philippians 2 says beautifully, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped.
Even though he had every right.
Every right. He possessed every reason to cling to divine privilege, to demand honor, but he willingly let it go, choosing the path of humility and service instead.
Then the Pauline epistles, they seem to give us a more systematic, maybe a broader theological framework for understanding pride. Romans 1 is a key starting point, linking pride directly to the fallen human condition.
Yes, in Romans 1, Paul describes idolatry as basically rooted in arrogant eponemy. Humanity, in rebellion, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images. And this trade, this turning away from God, is ultimately driven by self-exaltation.
So pride isn't just a separate sin. It's tied up with our worship, or our misplaced worship.
Deeply intertwined, we turn from God to worship ourselves or created things, and pride is right there at the root of that exchange.
And the doctrine of justification by faith, which is so central for Paul, seems like it's designed to directly confront and take apart pride at its foundation. How does that work?
It absolutely is, and it seems intentionally designed that way. Romans 3 and 4 declare that justification by faith shuts every mouth and excludes boasting. Romans 3.27, what's that mean?
No room for bragging.
Essentially, yes. Human righteousness, the kind that makes us right with God, is alien. It's credited to us. It comes from outside us, from Christ alone, not from our works or our inherent goodness.
So it's a gift.
Entirely. Ephesians 2.8-9 hammers this home. Salvation is not a result of works, so that no one may boast. This grounds the believer's identity completely in God's grace. To boast about our salvation, then, is to totally misunderstand how redemption works. It's like claiming credit for a free gift.
That really does make sense. If it's all a gift purely by grace, then there's zero room for self-glory or patting ourselves on the back. It's all God's doing.
Precisely. And Paul drives this home again in 1 Corinthians 4.7 with that humbling question, what do you have that you did not receive?
Oof. Yeah.
That question reframes everything, including our spiritual gifts. They aren't achievements for self-promotion or status-seeking, but spirit-given duties meant for building up the community, for mutual edification. It forces us to see God as the source of every good thing we have or are.
The general epistles and Revelation then seem to keep driving this message home, echoing these themes.
They do. James, for instance, calls pride spiritual adultery. He links it with friendship with the world in James 4. That highlights its spiritual betrayal, suggesting that loving the world and its values is a direct betrayal of our singular devotion to God.
Strong language.
Very. Peter calls believers to clothe yourselves with humility, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That's 1 Peter 5.5. A clear divine command paired with a clear consequence and a beautiful promise. God actively resists the proud, but he pours out favor on the humble.
And Revelation gives us that incredible picture.
Yes, the 24 elders casting their crowns before the throne, Revelation 4. It's this dramatic, worshipful scene showing that redeemed glory ends up in this posture of profound, self-abasing worship.
Giving back the honor.
Exactly. The whole universe is set up so that the highest honor isn't grasped or held onto. It's freely given back to God. It mirrors the Lamb's own path from humiliation to ultimate exaltation.
This brings us to a really potent Christological contrast, doesn't it? Seems like a central anchor for the whole biblical view on pride and humility.
It's the very heart of the story. Where Adam, in pride, reached for equality with God, Christ, in humility, emptied himself. Where humanity at Babel tried to climb up in rebellion, the New Jerusalem, God's redeemed people, comes down from heaven. Where Nebuchadnezzar boasted about what he built, the true King Jesus found his glory in perfect obedience even to death on a cross.
It's a complete reversal.
A total reversal. In Jesus, the Creator stoops lower than any creature could possibly imagine. He completely turns earthly measures of prestige upside down and shows that true humility, not arrogance, is the restored image of God.
So pride is identified as this primal distortion of creaturely posture, as the sources put it, a deviation from our created design.
Yes, a fundamental deviation, answered only by God's downward-moving grace that lifts the humble. The consistent story of the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, declares again and again, God alone is to be exalted, and every lifted heart is summoned to bow before his supremacy.
That gives us such a solid grounding in the historical and theological roots and pride. But let's bring this home now. How does this ancient fundamental distortion actually show up in the nitty-gritty of our modern lives? Personally, in our churches, even in the culture around us.
That's the crucial next step, isn't it? And it requires, well, a spirit-guided discernment of our deeper motives, the subtle patterns in how we act and react. It's about looking past the surface to the heart's orientation.
Okay, so let's start with personal spirituality, just our individual walk with God. How does pride sneak in there, often without us even realizing it?
Well, one primary symptom, often missed, is prayerlessness. A lack of feeling the need for daily, consistent asking God for help suggests a hidden self-sufficiency.
Like thinking, I've got this.
Pretty much like operating with the unspoken idea, I can handle this myself. It's a kind of functional deism where we act like we can manage life without constantly relying on God's input and sustaining grace.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Another very common sign is defensiveness. Quick temper when someone critiques you, bristling at feedback, or just being unable to admit you made a mistake. This points to a strong desire for self-justification, always trying to protect your own image or rightness, rather than humbly receiving correction.
I can definitely see that plays out, yeah. What about entitlement? That feels like a big cultural buzzword right now.
It is, and it's a subtle but really pervasive form of pride. It shows up in unspoken expectations, feeling like you deserve certain honors or expecting life to be easy or thinking you should get preferential treatment. It consistently forgets that every good thing comes ultimately from God's hand.
It's like an unconscious sense of deserving more.
Right, than what you've received. Then there's the hypercritical spirit. This is scorning other believers, constantly finding fault, maybe imposing extra rules or scruples, not out of genuine love, but really to boost your own perceived spiritual superiority.
Like the Pharisee again.
Exactly like the Pharisee in Jesus' parable. Someone might be outwardly orthodox, doctrinally sound, but inwardly judgmental, and this pride twists even their acts of worship into self-exaltation.
And what about selective obedience? That sounds particularly tricky.
It really is. It's the tendency to embrace the spiritual disciplines or commands that fit our natural personality, or maybe the ones that make us feel good, while conveniently finding excuses for not doing the commands that require real self-denial or are personally inconvenient.
So picking and choosing.
Yeah. Pride, like water, tends to flow down the path of least resistance. It subtly twists convenience into feeling like faithfulness, choosing the spiritual practices that make you feel good or look good, while cleverly avoiding the ones that genuinely humble you or demand sacrifice.
Okay, moving to corporate church life now. How does pride show up within the community of believers?
Well, pride often masks itself as giftedness or competence within the church. You might see it in preachers who seem to subtly fish for applause rather than seeking God's approval, or musicians who get overly focused on streaming numbers for their worship songs, or even elders who use their office more for personal influence than for genuinely caring for and serving the flock.
So gifts meant for building up become tools for self-promotion.
Sadly, yes. Spiritual gifts, meant only for mutual edification and God's glory, can become just items on a resume or ways to build a personal platform.
What else in church life?
Another key symptom is congregational factionalism. When personal preferences, whether it's worship style or secondary theological viewpoints, or maybe even ethnic or economic identity, harden into opposing camps that divide the church, well, pride is very often driving that division. It tramples the unity Christ died to create.
And resistance to church discipline. That feels like a direct clash with self-sovereignty.
It is a very clear sign. This resistance can come from the person being disciplined who resents correction, but also from bystanders who question the church's right to judge or step in. This unwillingness to submit reveals a desire for personal autonomy over Christ's headship and the authority he delegated to his church.
Okay.
Then there's something you might call token diversity. A church might highlight a few members from different backgrounds to project an image of openness.
Right, look how diverse we are.
Exactly. But underneath, the church might still operate by unspoken social or economic rules, effectively using people as props for institutional vanity instead of truly integrating them into genuine fellowship.
And programmatic busyness. That sounds almost positive, like the church is active.
It can seem that way. But sometimes constant activity and endless programs can cover up a subtle fear. A fear that God's ordinary means of grace, just preaching, the sacraments, prayer, are somehow too unimpressive or too simple to really draw people in.
So human effort replaces reliance on God.
It can lean that way. Human activity becomes a kind of monument to human ingenuity, rather than a humble channel for divine grace. It's a subtle belief that our clever programs can achieve what only God's Spirit can do.
Okay, finally, let's hold up that cultural mirror. How does the spirit of our age reflect and maybe even amplify pride, sometimes in ways we don't even notice?
Well, social media is a huge and pretty obvious example, isn't it?
For sure.
These platforms normalize this highly curated self-presentation. Filters, follower counts, constant self-expression. It actively encourages self-exaltation. Even posts that seem pious can, underneath, be driven by that subtle pull toward hyperephenia, that desire for likes, for validation.
And consumer culture.
Consumer markets definitely play a role. They subtly teach us to find our identity and worth in what we own: cars, clothes, tech gadgets, brands. This constant message kind of drowns out the biblical reminder that earthly stuff is temporary. It ties our self-worth to material things, breeds discontent, and keeps us wanting more.
And political discourse, especially today. It feels like a breeding ground for pride.
It often rewards certainty and outrage more than careful listening or nuanced thinking, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And this can lead Christians, sometimes without realizing it, to sort of baptize a party platform as the kingdom, equating their political side with God's will. It can echo Nebuchadnezzar's boast, "Isn't this great Babylon I have built?" There's a self-assuredness, a self-righteousness that often shuts down humble dialogue and the willingness to understand other views.
What about academia or professional life?
Those arenas often foster what you might call respectable pride, getting degrees, titles, hitting productivity targets. These can become subtle fig leaves, covering our deeper need for self-worth. These outwardly admirable things can, unfortunately, become idols that feed the ego.
And you mentioned contemporary therapeutic culture. How does that fit in? It seems aimed at helping people.
It often is, but sometimes it can inadvertently redefine the problem of pride. It can misidentify pride's cure as simply needing more self-regard rather than God-regard.
So it frames sin like pride as just low self-esteem.
Sometimes, yes, and by doing that, it can make the self both the problem and the solution. This kind of flips the script on the real remedy and subtly reinforces the very self-centeredness it's trying to fix. It can sound a bit like the serpent's old promise dressed up in psychological terms. Look inside yourself for the answer. Now, listing all these symptoms isn't meant to make us morbidly introspective or just condemn ourselves. It's meant to be like an X-ray.
To see what's really there.
Right. To help us see the need for the gospel remedy, to help us dismantle self-glory so we can enthrone Christ alone in our hearts.
That's a sobering but really helpful diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it leads us straight into the theological anatomy of pride, especially from a Reformed viewpoint. If pride is really this deep, this pervasive, how does it connect to the core doctrines of our faith? Starting with anthropology, the doctrine of humanity.
Well, from that perspective, pride is often seen as the signature pathology, you might say, of human corruption after the fall. It radically twists and deforms the image of God in us.
How so?
Well, think about our faculties, our intellect. Designed to grasp and reflect God's truth and glory, instead becomes like a forge of self-justifying rationalizations. It's like a factory constantly churning out excuses for ourselves, twisting reality to make us look good or let us off the hook.
In our will.
Our will, meant for joyful dependence on God and obedience, becomes curved inward. Incurvatus in se is the Latin phrase often used. It resists that joyful dependence. And our affections, designed to delight in God's glory and find satisfaction in Him, they instead fixate on the praise of people or worldly approval.
So the fall affected everything.
Holistically, yes. Pride isn't a minor flaw in one part of us. It's more like as one source put it, gangrene coursing through the bloodstream, affecting every spiritual organ, every faculty of our being.
Not just a part of us, but corrupting the whole. And this naturally leads to hamartiology, the doctrine of sin, where pride is often called the mother sin.
Exactly. It's not just a sin among many, it's widely seen as the root sin, the foundational rebellion from which all specific wrong actions ultimately grow. Every external sin we commit, lying, envy, greed, flows from an interior elevation of self over God.
Like Paul described in Romans 1.
Right. Exchanging God's glory for images, worshiping the created rather than the creator. That trade is fundamentally motivated by this arrogant autonomy. And this act directly strikes at God's majesty itself. It implicitly tries to dethrone God by lifting up the creature.
And it has consequences.
Two major ones: guilt and enslavement. Pride makes us guilty because it violates God's holy standard, and it enslaves the will. Apart from God's grace, a person cannot not be proud. They're captive to it.
Wow. So given this incredibly deep-rooted and pervasive nature of pride, how does salvation itself actually work to remove it? If we're so fundamentally bent by pride, how can we ever overcome it?
Well, what's really striking here is how the whole design of salvation seems fundamentally opposed to pride at every single step. It's purposefully, you could say, designed to topple pride at every stage of the Ordo Salutis.
The order of salvation.
Right, the logical sequence of God's work in saving us. Every step God takes in our redemption is like a direct assault on human self-sufficiency and any basis for boasting.
Okay, can you walk us through some of those stages? How do they specifically tackle pride?
Sure. Let's start with election. The idea that God sovereignly chose us before time began, that just demolishes any room for human boasting, doesn't it?
Because it wasn't based on us.
Not at all. As 1 Corinthians 1.29 says, it ensures no human being might boast in the presence of God. Our salvation doesn't start with our choice or our merit, but with God's free decision.
Okay, what's next?
Then there's effectual calling. That's the Spirit's work in bringing us to faith. This calling is done solely by the Spirit, stripping the sinner of any claim to having generated their own faith or taken the spiritual initiative. It's God's initiative completely, waking up a spiritually dead soul.
And justification by grace through faith. That seems like a direct hit against pride.
It absolutely is. Foundational truth. Ephesians 2.9 puts it plainly. Salvation is not a result of works so that no one may boast. It reframes human righteousness, the right standing we need with God, as entirely external. It's credited to us. It's something we receive, not something we achieve.
Okay, even sanctification, the process of becoming more like Christ.
Even that is guarded from pride by the Spirit's ongoing work. Philippians 2.13 tells us God is at work in believers to will and to act according to his good purpose. We don't sanctify ourselves. God is working in us.
And perseverance. How does that disarm pride?
Perseverance, the assurance that believers will stay in faith until the end it is, gets rid of any self-confidence in our own ability to keep ourselves saved. Believers are kept by the Creator's hand, as 1 Peter 1.5 says, not by how tightly we hold on or our own spiritual strength.
So pride just keeps getting undermined at every step.
Repeatedly suffocated, you might say, under successive waves of grace until it's finally overcome. And the very conclusion of salvation is summed up in that phrase, Soli Deo Gloria.
To God alone be the glory.
Right, because every part of it, initiation, completion, application, is entirely accomplished by the triune God. It's a glorious, God-centered work from start to finish.
So salvation itself is perfectly structured to block human boasting and make sure God gets all the credit. How does the doctrine of the church, ecclesiology, provide a kind of communal architecture that works against pride?
Yeah. The church's communal structures seem deliberately shaped to discourage pride and foster humility. Think about gift distribution. Christ gives out spiritual gifts to each one individually as he wills, according to 1 Corinthians 12.
Not based on merit.
No. It undermines any hierarchy based on natural talent, social standing, or perceived spiritual superiority. Every gift is a bestowal of grace, not a personal achievement.
On the body metaphor.
The metaphor of the body in 1 Corinthians 12 sets interdependence, not self-sufficiency, is the church's basic way of being. We're all connected, needing each other's gifts, each other's perspectives. No part can boast about not needing another part.
What about leadership roles within the church? How does that dynamic counter pride?
Well, leaders are clearly told to model servanthood, not to lord authority over the flock. That's 1 Peter 5.3. Their job is to shepherd, not to dominate. Church discipline also acts as a crucial check against self-exalting tendencies, applying to both leaders and members. And the ordinary means of grace preaching, sacraments, corporate prayer, they're communal ordinances. You can't hoard them privately or use them in isolation to build personal status.
And the weekly rhythm.
Right. The Church's consistent rhythms of confession and absolution, they enact a liturgical dethroning of self each Lord's Day. We collectively rehearse the truth that any merit we might want to show off has already been dealt with at the cross, leaving us completely dependent on Christ's mercy.
A liturgical dethroning of self. I like that image. Finally, eschatology, the doctrine of last things. That seems to promise the ultimate end of pride. How does our future hope factor in?
It really does. Eschatology projects pride's complete annihilation into the consummation of all things. At the final judgment, Revelation 20 says every secret boasting is unmasked. Every hidden motive, every subtle self-promotion will be laid bare.
No hiding then.
None. But for the justified, for believers, future exaltation consists of perpetual self-emptying worship. That's pictured so powerfully by the elders casting their crowns before the throne in Revelation 4.
Constant giving back of honor.
Exactly, an unending, voluntary giving back of all honor to God. And seeing God's glory directly in the beatific vision will forever cure pride. Self-glory will become both impossible and totally undesirable.
So our future hope informs our present.
Yes, present humility anticipates the very posture of eternity. It's the ultimate safeguard against arrogance and striving right now.
This comprehensive theological view is really compelling. Now let's turn to historical witnesses. It's clear this isn't a new worry. Figures throughout church history have consistently talked about pride. Can you share some of those voices, maybe starting way back at the patristic era?
Absolutely. Augustine, a giant figure from that era, gave us that classic formulation of pride as amor sui.
That disordered self-love.
Right. Love that bends the soul inward, away from God. He argued strongly that the proud heart wills to be its own sufficiency, striving for independence even though its every breath depends on God. His view really nailed down that foundational creator-creature distinction and how pride violates it.
Yeah.
And after him, Gregory the Great, another key figure, famously identified pride as the queen of the vices, superbia. He argued it's the generative source, the spring from which all other wrongdoings flow. So that era made it really clear that pride is fundamentally theological, a direct hit against divine sovereignty.
And the medieval voices, they continued this conversation.
They did, adding layers. Figures like Bernard of Clairvaux, for instance, meticulously mapped out 12 degrees of pride. He contrasted it vividly with humility, picturing them as opposing ladders.
Ladders.
Yeah. He noted that Adam descended into sin by climbing in pride, while Christ ascended in glory by descending into humility. It's a powerful image.
It is.
Thomas Aquinas affirmed pride as a privation of right order, an appetite for excellence beyond what is fitting. And medieval mystics, like Meister Eckhart, warned against spiritual pride, that subtler, more dangerous kind that can trap even devout people. Works like Imitatio Christi recommended anonymous service as a potent antidote.
Then the Reformation seems to have really reframed the discussion, centering pride within the doctrine of salvation itself. What was Luther's key insight here?
Luther drew this critical distinction between a theology of glory and a theology of the cross.
Okay, explain this.
The theology of glory, he said, represents that human instinct to try and climb toward God using our own perceived merit, intellectual achievements, moral efforts, whatever. The theology of the cross, in total contrast, shows God descending in weakness and humility, crucifying his Son to justify sinners. For Luther, pride wasn't just moral failing, it was also intellectual presumption, assuming we could grasp God through our works or reason, instead of solely through Christ's humiliation on the cross.
And John Calvin built on this.
Calvin powerfully systematized Luther's points. He vividly described the human heart as an idol factory, constantly churning out rival glories to compete with God's.
An idol factory.
Yeah. He famously declared that all that is in man is pride without God's regenerating grace. He connected this back to Augustine's disordered love, but placed it within a covenantal framework. Reformed doctrines like unconditional election, total depravity, they were carefully formulated precisely to remove every last bit of self-trust, any spark of boasting, ensuring salvation is seen as entirely God's work.
Moving forward to the 17th century Puritans, figures like John Owen and Thomas Watson, what do they add?
John Owen, in his classic Of the Mortification of Sin, argued that pride is inbred and naturalized within believers, meaning it's persistent, deeply embedded, and needs lifelong, spirit-enabled mortification, a continuous putting to death of that sin.
Not a one-time fix.
Not at all. Thomas Watson called pride the shirt of the soul.
The shirt of the soul.
Yeah, implying you can't just take it off with external behavioral changes alone. It's too close, too much a part of us. Both of them consistently pointed to God's ordinary means of grace, faithful preaching, sacraments, church discipline, as the divine tools designed to pierce self-importance and dismantle those hidden citadels of pride in the heart.
And this conversation didn't stop there. Modern Reformed voices have kept warning against pride.
Oh, absolutely. Jonathan Edwards, in Religious Affections, warned sharply against evangelical pride. That sneaky ability to boast about your own humility or spiritual experiences, turning virtue into a subtle vice.
Pride in being humble.
Exactly. Charles Spurgeon likened pride to spiritual carbon monoxide, odorless but lethal. He urged believers to daily immerse themselves in cruciform grace, the grace found at the cross. J. Gresham Machen framed theological liberalism as rooted in intellectual pride, putting human reason above divine revelation.
And more recently,
R.C. Sproul and John Piper have consistently echoed that Augustinian insight. Only a massive vision of God's majesty can truly empty the soul of self-exaltation. Piper, for instance, has powerfully said something like, "We are most satisfied when God is most glorified, and God is most glorified when we are most humbly dependent."
even our confessional standards, foundational to Reformed theology, tackle this head-on.
Yes, they do. The Westminster Larger Catechism lists pride first among sins that aggravate guilt because it directly rebelleth against God. That highlights its severity.
And the Heidelberg.
The Heidelberg Catechism teaches that the very first petition of the Lord's Prayer, "Hallowed be thy name," is fundamentally a prayer asking to be rescued from self-promotion, asking that God's name alone would be glorified. So the confessions really embed this anti-pride reflex into Reformed worship and teaching.
Okay, let's unpack this next part then. If pride is so deep-seated, so historically recognized, how do we actually start to cultivate genuine humility in our lives? What does that look like practically?
Well, connecting this to the bigger picture, true humility isn't just a surface trait or a behavior. It's more a disposition of the heart that's created as we consciously behold, embrace, and try to echo Christ in our lives. It's not about self-hatred, but about rightly seeing our place in relation to a sovereign, glorious God.
Which brings us straight to the Christological paradigm in Philippians 2. How does Christ's example really shape our pursuit of humility and even make it possible?
Christ's kenosis, his emptying himself, is absolutely foundational here. The eternal Son of God freely emptied himself. How? By taking on human nature, then humbling himself even further by going to the cross. And only then did he receive universal acclaim and exaltation from the Father.
So humility comes before honor.
Yes, it shows us true humility is a voluntary downward move, done for God's glory and others' good, all while trusting the Father for the ultimate lifting up. And when you see it that way, pride becomes completely illogical, doesn't it? Well, if Christ, who had every right to cling to divine privilege, willingly chose not to, how can created beings like us, with no such inherent rights, ever justify clinging to our own little perceived privileges or demanding honor?
Good point.
Thinking about the incarnation, God becoming human, and the passion Christ suffering for us, it's like performing heart surgery. It actively works to remove that tumor of self-importance by replacing it with deep adoration for him.
So seeing Christ changes our perspective and motivation. What about our new identity as adopted children of God? How does that help?
The declaration in 1 John 3.1 that believers are children of God is incredibly liberating. It frees the soul from that deep insecurity that needs to constantly prove ourselves.
Because our status is secure.
Exactly. Adoption means God's unconditional acceptance comes before any of our achievements. That makes competitive comparison just obsolete. We don't need to scramble for status among people because our primary status as beloved children is already secure in God's family.
And that gives freedom.
Profound freedom. Freedom to take the lower place, maybe at work, in a discussion, even online. We don't need the outward recognition because we're already honored in the Father's house. Every humble act becomes less like a sacrifice and more like just acting like part of the family, reflecting our Father's character.
And the eschatological horizon, our future hope, our glorification, that also plays a key role in fostering present humility.
It really does. Understanding our future glorification described in Romans 8:30, that God, having justified us, will also glorify us, it removes that frantic need to grab micro-honors now.
We don't need instant praise.
Right, because our ultimate honor is guaranteed in Christ. The clear promise that God will exalt you at the proper time, as James and Peter say, enables us to serve, even take risks in service, without worrying about immediate recognition. It empowers quiet faithfulness in unseen ministries, knowing our real reward comes from God alone in His time.
Beyond these huge theological foundations, what about the ordinary means of grace and practical spiritual disciplines? How do they help us actively dismantle that ego fortress of pride?
Well, the ministry of the word is absolutely primary. Scripture acts like both a mirror and surgeon.
Mirror and surgeon.
As a mirror, it relentlessly shows us pride's subtle motives, our hidden self-centeredness. As a surgeon, it recenters us on God's glory alone, cutting away our false idols. Expository preaching, where the sermon's main point comes straight from the text's main point, aims to leave congregations feeling naked and empty of self before a holy God.
And personal Bible study.
Private study does a similar humbling work. Reading genealogies reminds us how small our part is in God's huge story. Laments train us to cry out independence, not demand answers. Doxologies constantly redirect all praise upward. All these things start to crack pride's dominion.
What about specific prayer practices?
Daily penitential prayer, like praying Psalm 51 or 131 each morning, reheats the truth that our most fundamental identity is sinner saved by grace. Keeping that awareness alive before God really helps keep pride in check.
So the word is essential. What about the sacraments, baptism, and the Lord's Supper? How do these embodied practices work against pride?
The sacraments are really potent, embodied ways that reinforce the gospel's logic, which is inherently anti-pride. Baptism publicly declares the old self has been buried with Christ. It signifies dying to any claim of autonomous greatness or self-righteousness. It visually reminds believers of that baptismal burial of self-sufficiency.
And the Lord's Supper.
Shared regularly, it gathers all kinds of different believers, rich, poor, weak, strong, gifted, seemingly not so gifted, to one common table where everyone receives what nobody could earn. And that pronouncement, the blood of Christ shed for you, confronts each one of us with immense, undeserved personal mercy. It effectively silences pride, as we remember our salvation is entirely His grace.
Prayer, fasting, and lament are also listed as vital disciplines. Can you unpack how each of those helps dismantle self-sufficiency?
Sure. Prayer, just at its core, is the posture of admitted weakness. It's a consistent, daily confession echoing Jesus' words, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." Regular prayer, especially using a pattern like ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication, creates this regular liturgical space for humility in our lives. A prayerless week, on the other hand, really reveals functional deism, an inner assumption we can manage on our own.
In fasting, how does that work?
Fasting intensifies prayer by deliberately imposing creaturely limits on the body. Think about it. When your stomach growls, it's not just physical hunger. It becomes a visceral, undeniable physical reminder of your dependence as a creature.
Right, you feel your need.
Exactly. It forces you to say, I'm not self-sufficient. I need God even for my next meal, for every breath. It powerfully shifts your focus from earthly provision to God's sustaining hand.
And lament. That's one we don't talk about much.
We often neglect it, but it's valuable. Lament allows believers to voice protest against brokenness, suffering, injustice, but without a sense of entitlement. It's a humble confession that only God can vindicate His name and ultimately fix things. This practice frees the heart from that proud delusion that we have to write the happy ending ourselves or solve every problem with our own strength.
What about practices like hidden acts of service or keeping good deeds secret? That seems so countercultural.
It is countercultural, but deeply biblical. Jesus commending alms and prayer done in secret in Matthew 6 shows how hidden acts starve the ego of its favorite food public recognition.
Takes away the audience.
Exactly. Serving anonymously, maybe in the nursery, cleaning the church, giving financially without fanfare, these are profound apprenticeships in kenosis, mirroring Christ's own humble service. And practices like writing genuine thank you notes or consistently praising others' gifts to third parties actively redirect honor away from ourselves toward others and ultimately toward God. It consciously rewires our perception to attribute good things to God's providence, not our own merit.
Are there other practical exercises we can build into daily life?
Well, besides the disciplines we've mentioned, there's gratitude journaling. Just recording 3 specific undeserved gifts or blessings each night actively rewires perception to see God's hand. not our own deserts.
That's practical.
Deliberate listening is also key. Cultivating that posture James talks about. Quick to hear, slow to speak. Asking clarifying questions before jumping in with opinions is a humble practice countering the prideful urge to always be right or have the last word.
And Sabbath rest.
Scheduled Sabbath rest combats that pervasive functional pride that subtly equates our worth with our productivity. It serves as a weekly confession. The world, indeed the church, will survive without my continuous output. We are not indispensable.
These are all powerful individual practices. How do communal remedies, the structures of the church itself, help in this ongoing battle against pride?
Well, pride often thrives in isolation, right?
Yeah.
So communal remedies are absolutely essential. Mutual exhortation, like Hebrews 3.13 commands, exhort one another every day, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin, provides necessary mirrors that we often avoid on our own.
We need each other to see ourselves clearly.
We do. And church structures like membership vows, elder oversight, formative discipline, they provide the setting for these honest, corrective conversations to happen within covenant love, all aimed at spiritual growth. And corporate worship itself, the act of singing psalms and hymns together, forms a powerful liturgy of decentering. Many voices in harmony, no soloists stealing the glory.
So the very design of church life, when it's healthy, pushes against self-centeredness.
Precisely. A congregational culture that consistently celebrates quiet faithfulness, the unseen service, the steady devotion of ordinary members, more than outward charisma, and where elders model humility by admitting weakness and repenting, that fosters a culture where humility is genuinely desired.
With small groups.
Small groups practicing gospel reflection, like asking how recent successes or failures drove you to Christ, provide peer-level mirrors that pride cannot easily avoid. Honest feedback in a supportive setting.
Even things like liturgy design.
Yes, liturgical design can play a role. Corporate confession of sin each week, rotating who reads scripture or leads music, church architecture that highlights the baptistry and communion table. All these can consistently cement a congregational culture of humility, reminding everyone of their dependence on God's grace.
Moving towards wrapping up, how can we apply these vital truths in practical teaching settings? For preaching, you mentioned Jesus' parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke 18. How might that work?
Yeah, that parable is perfect.
Yeah.
A sermon can really unpack the contrast, self-trust versus dependence on mercy. It can invite listeners to identify with the humble tax collector, trusting Christ alone for righteousness. And you can draw parallels to modern forms of pride. Maybe resume recitals of our achievements, using doctrinal knowledge to look smart, or having subtle contempt for people we think are less enlightened.
Bringing it home.
Right. And the sermon should always conclude strongly with 1 Corinthians 1.31. Let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. The aim is both to humble us by exposing pride and then immediately point us to Christ as our only boast.
What about adult education settings? Like a multi-week class?
A multi-week series offers a great chance for deeper engagement. You could logically explore the biblical storyline of pride, dig into how God's grace specifically humbles us through the order of salvation, look at habitual practices for cultivating humility, and discuss humility in our daily work or vocation.
Include Bible study.
Definitely. Inductive studies of key passages. You could even encourage participants to consider writing a personal humility covenant to foster commitment. The structure could follow the points we've discussed: the problem of pride, the grace that humbles, practices of humility, humility in the world.
And for youth ministry, that's often focused on identity and self-esteem. How do you teach this there?
Experiential learning is really key for young people. Maybe a social media fast could help them reflect on their desire for visibility, paired with studies of Christ's humility and quiet service. Service learning days, where they serve in unseen ways, can help them value serving without needing the spotlight.
Making it tangible.
Yes. Creative things like dramatizing the foot washing scene can make Christ's example really stick. It's about retraining that instinct to equate value only with public recognition.
And finally, leader training for pastors, elders, teachers.
Integrating humility right into how they learn to interpret Scripture is crucial, requiring peer review of sermons or lessons. Intentionally recognizing quiet excellence behind-the-scenes service among potential leaders. These things help ensure those in influential positions are actively modeling the humility they're called to foster in others. It cultivates a culture where leadership means servanthood, not self-promotion.
So as we conclude this deep dive, what does this all really mean for us?
Well, if we connect this to the broader picture, pride is this fundamental, deep fault line in humanity. But the really good news is that the gospel offers an equally thorough grace, an equally deep remedy. It's a lifelong project, really, of aligning our creaturely posture with divine reality, a continuous turning from self to God.
And what's the specific call for us, for you listening, as we think about this going forward?
This deep dive is really an urge to examine your own motives. Like 2 Corinthians 13.5 says, test yourselves. Where you see prayerlessness or defensiveness or that subtle sense of entitlement creeping in, let's immediately turn to grace. Seek forgiveness. Ask for God's help.
And when we do see humility,
When genuine humility does blossom, even in small, unnoticed ways, let's be quick to credit every bit of it to divine mercy. Recognize God as the source of all good.
it sounds like practicing eternity now in a way.
Yes, exactly. Consider that powerful scene again, the elders casting their crowns before the throne in Revelation. A perfect picture of relinquished honor, giving all glory back to God. Wisdom calls us to start practicing that posture now in our daily lives, giving God the credit for everything.
So the ultimate goal.
The ultimate goal is that every thought, every word, every action would genuinely echo that doxology. Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord, until self-glory is completely gone, eclipsed, and the triune God is truly all in all.
And that concludes our deep dive into pride and humility. We really trust this discussion has been helpful for you, offering maybe some clarity and some encouragement.
Remember, the call isn't really to think less of ourselves, but maybe to think of ourselves less often, allowing Christ to stand in the foreground of everything.
Join us next time for another deep dive, where we'll unpack more insights from your sources.
Yeah.
Until then, keep seeking understanding.